Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. I've been thinking a lot about Israeli elections. The elections for the 12th Israeli Knesset and the next Prime Minister will take place on March 17th, just prior to Passover. Elections in Israel are nothing like they are in the United States. Israeli elections have always been fascinating, a blend of pathos and humor. And I predict that this election will be no exception. Old parties die and new parties emerge. Large parties shrink and traditional parties break up. That's what happens in Israeli elections. Over the next 3 months, we will see a slew of ads, jingles, bumper stickers, portraying the ideals, visions, and foibles of each party and their leaders. Beyond the failed parties and the arrogance, however, we will see some greatness emerge. Israelis will spend the next 3 months debating and discussing the priorities of their state. That discussion is enormously positive. But let's talk about how elections in Israel work. Israel is a parliamentary democracy, not a republic like the United States. Its elections are more like Canada and Great Britain than the United States. In Israel, the Knesset is the parliament, and it's composed of 120 seats. It's called the Knesset. Knesset actually means assembly. The word means to bring together. Interestingly, the word parliament comes from the French word parlement or parler, which means to speak, very different than the concept of Knesset. The founders of Israel chose the name Knesset because the prophet Ezra created the idea of the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah, the men of the Great Assembly. And then, during the time of the Mishnah, the group of Jewish leaders who were legislative leaders of Israel were referred to by the same name, Anshe Knesset Hagdolah. It had 120 members, and it was the legal body of the time. Israel's forefathers wanted a Jewish historical name that represented and resonated with Jewish leadership and power. There had also been a Jewish body called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin had 70 representatives, and they were mostly scholars. The Anshe Knesset Hagdolah had leaders and scholars together. So it was decided that the 120-seat parliament would be called the Knesset, and it would be located in Jerusalem. The symbol of the state of Israel and the Knesset is the 7-branch menorah. And the internal design of the seating of the Knesset is set up to mimic the menorah. The 7 branches of menorah, where the seats are set up that way. 7 branches, and the cabinet and the prime minister sit in the very middle branch. Outside the Knesset building in Jerusalem is the famous menorah, which symbolizes the Knesset and Israel itself. The menorah represents the period of the Anshe Knesset, as well as when Jews were autonomous and when they had a government of their own. The name and the symbol of Knesset and menorah resonate with great history. Article 4 of the Basic Law of Israel discusses Knesset elections. It should take place every 4 years according to the law, unless otherwise required by circumstances. And that's actually the translation. Like a vote of no confidence, which just happened. And the quote from the Basic Law reads, "The Knesset shall be elected by general, national, direct, equal, secret, and proportional elections in accordance with the Knesset election law," unquote. That's the basic law. So Israelis vote for parties, not for people, when they vote in an election. This is very important, and I need to repeat it. Israelis vote for a party, not for a person. And so the parties create a list, and according to the percentage of votes received, that many members of the party enter the Knesset. But there is a threshold, a minimum number of votes required to get into the Knesset, to be part of the 120. The threshold used to be very low, at 1%. Then it was increased higher, And eventually in 2013, it was increased to 2%. By the March of 2014, the Knesset raised it to 3.25% of the threshold. This increase is supposed to eliminate the tiny parties. That way, a single or even a two-seat party cannot exist. Now, in order to be represented, a party needs 3.25% of the votes, which really turns out to be 3 seats. It eliminates the small parties. Dozens of parties will submit their list to the registry and will run for the Knesset. The standard parties include Likud and Labor, Yesh Atid, Jewish Home, Israel Beitenu, Meretz, Kadima, Shas, United Torah Judaism, 3 separate Arab parties. Some new parties may emerge, and some recent parties might shrink. Some old parties might even disappear. I predict that there will be 35 to 45 parties running for election, but only 10 to 14 will pass the threshold. There will certainly be some funny parties. In the past, there were 2 green parties, one for the environment, that makes sense, and one for pot, yes, for marijuana. Legalizing marijuana was a major party. They did not pass the threshold. Neither did the Green Party, by the way. The Retirees Party had a very good run. They passed the threshold once. There was a party for Holocaust survivors. There was even a party for taxi drivers. Every citizen over 18 may vote for a single party, for one vote. After the votes have been tallied, then the fun begins. It's the coalition. In order to govern, a party must create alliances with other parties to create a coalition of at least 61. That's one more than half of the 120 seats in the Knesset. The party must likely be able to form a government and is asked by the president to do so. And that leader has 28 days to do so. They may request another 14 days on top of that if they need, but otherwise the president has to ask another party if they don't succeed. That's the way it works. The leader of that party who forms the government becomes the prime minister. So there's no direct election for prime minister. There is a direct election for president in the United States and a separate one for Congress. That doesn't exist in Israel. It did once, just once. Israel had a direct ballot for prime minister once in 1996 and a second ballot for the Knesset. Like the US style, only in Israel, because it only happened once, it really did not have the checks and balances required. They abolished it in 2001. It was a dismal failure. It could not rein in the prime minister. The Knesset felt powerless. And so interestingly, in 1996, the prime minister elected directly by direct vote of the people, not through party, was Bibi Netanyahu. The coalition then is created with agreements and promises that one party has for the other about power and positions, and of course principles. That's important too. It happens that almost by definition, the party who forms the government sets the tone, but the next largest party in the coalition has all the power. Because if they bolt, the government almost always falls, and Israel returns to new elections. Predictions, polling, they're coming out all the time, but it's way too early to tell what will happen over the next few months and predict who will win. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up is a column by J. Michaelson in The Forward. It's entitled, Coming to Terms with Death of the Jewish Mainstream, a Despair Not Worth Fighting. A word about the paper, The Forward. The Forward is a powerful liberal weekly Jewish paper. It's filled with ideas and culture. It has a surprisingly small circulation, but all the leaders of the Jewish world read it, and the non-Jewish world monitors it very closely. Originally, The Forward was a Yiddish paper, a daily Yiddish paper. Actually, its original name was the Jewish Daily Forwards. In Yiddish, Forwards means forward. In other words, to advance. It's only recently that The Forward came out as an English edition, which started as a supplement in the Yiddish paper in 1990. Actually, at its peak, The Forwards in Yiddish was the most read daily newspaper in the United States. You didn't hear that properly. Not the most read Jewish paper. I said the most read paper. Its circulation was larger than any other single paper in the United States. Abraham Isaac Kahn, the founding editor, was thought to have created the advice columns, which then became these great advice columns all over the world, and initiated letters to the editor, which are now the hottest thing. People go to only read letters to the editor. Actually, it's rumored that Kahn literally wrote both the letters and the advice in his forwards. People would literally fight to read the Bintel Brief. That's what it was called, the letters of advice in the forwards. That little letter, Bintel Brief means the little letter, to the editor asking advice on how to deal and confront with challenges of being Jewish in America. The Forward was a socialist paper. Its building was the largest building in the Lower East Side. Built in 1912, it was the center of the Lower East Side. Impressions of Marx and Engels and LaSalle were towering images on the main columns of the building itself. By 2000, the Yiddish subscriptions had fallen to 7,000 people, while the English edition had risen to 26,000 subscribers. This essay is by J. Michaelson. Michaelson is a PhD in Jewish history, Jewish thought, I should say, from Hebrew University, and a law degree from Yale. He got his rabbinic ordination from his longtime friend and teacher, Rabbi David Cooper, a famous Boo Jew. That's abbreviation for Buddhist Jew. Michaelson is the director of the LGBT Global Rights Initiative at the Democracy Council, a fellow at the Political Research Associates, associate editor of Religion Dispatches magazine, and a weekly columnist for the Forward newspaper. He sees crisis and is in despair. And I'm going to read to you his opening. He begins by saying, reading a Jewish newspaper and writing for one is often an exercise in masochism. Of course, the Forward has inspiring pieces on gefilte fish revival and the first female majority of Forward 50. As an aside, you should note that the Forward writes and creates an annual list called the Forward 50 of the 50 most important people. So then he continues. But when you look at the hard news and follow the trend lines, it's easy to feel despair. If you are progressive, Israel's Jewish state law is but the latest in a long line of anti-democratic, nativist, and thuggish actions by the present government, a government subsidized by American billionaires, one of whom has recently opined that Israel need not remain a democracy. He's already put his money where his mouth is. And if you're a conservative, he continues, you likely see Israel as increasingly demonized on the world stage, on college campuses, and in European parliaments. The Palestinian narrative seems to be winning, unquote. Michaelson then describes the awful situation he sees in the Jewish world. Michaelson tells the people to despair, that the situation is cataclysmic. He's wrong. I will repeat this in the end again. Michaelson is wrong. He says, quote, meanwhile, here at home, mainstream denominations are shrinking like those of Christianity, and no one has a solution. The American Jewish community in 2025 will be disproportionately ultra-Orthodox with a shrunken base that is increasingly ethnocentric. If you think the Jewish institutional wagons are circled now, just wait until the circle is smaller. He continues, quote, at this point, in a piece of this type, most writers would say, but don't give up, don't despair. Recommit yourselves to fighting the good fight, to writing good checks, to being the change you want to see in the world, unquote. And then he continues, I'm not going to do that. I'm done. I'm in despair mode, and I'm not getting out of it. It's December after all. I think it's better to give in to despair and admit it. Kick the tires of it. How does it feel? Is everything really so terrible? He finishes with some fascinating lines. He says, it's delusional that the microclimates we find ourselves in at this conference or at that social justice event are really the weather of the world. In fact, the whole notion of be the change is highly misleading. Michaelson concludes by saying that everything needs to change, that there is no real future in Zionism or in American Jewry, and that other alternatives are so much more exciting. He writes, quote, "Mass market American Judaism and mainstream political Zionism have lost much of their integrity. And yet, at the same time, the alternatives to both are exciting." He ends by quoting Gandhi. Here's what Gandhi actually said: "If we could change ourselves, the tendencies in the world would also change. As a man changes his own nature, so does the attitude of the world change towards him. We need not wait to see what others do," unquote. It is essays like this that so aggravate me. They preach about the end. Michaelson mistakes the struggle of trying to identify a real sense of mission and prioritizing the mission as well as finding its place in the modern world with a lack of mission, a lack of purpose. I say there is a great future for the Jewish people in Zionism and in other forms of Judaism. We just need to recognize the potential. There is greatness in the Jewish people, and a great future lies ahead. Next up is a column from the New York Times Sunday Review edition. That entire section is revamped recently. It used to be called The Week in Review. Now it's simply called the Sunday Review. Almost the entire section is an opinion piece of one sort or another. This piece is about finding kosher, sustainable fish. The column is authored by a writer, researcher specializing in sustainable marine food. His name is Paul Greenberg. Sustainable is an ecological term. It refers to the method where the environment remains diverse and productive as opposed to exploiting nature and destroying it. This New York Times piece is entitled, quote, "Can Seafood Be Kosher and Sustainable?" The title alone makes me smile. Greenberg is a Pew Fellow in marine conservation. He's the author of a book called American Catch: The Fight for Local Seafood. By the way, this Pew is the Pew Center for Arts and Heritage. The famous Jewish study was conducted by her sister think tank called the Pew Research Center. Actually, the piece is very, very funny. Greenberg is witty, insightful, all at the same time. A breath of fresh air coming out of the Times that is sometimes just too serious about the events and the ideas it raises. I have a rule about humor and about ideas. One always has to find humor in things. That is especially the case for power and ideas. I have a litmus test for leaders about that. Part of it has to do with whether a healthy sense of humor is a part of their character. Humor is the best way to engage in self-critique. This piece comes with a chart, which is courtesy of the famous Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch, with some kosher suggestions by the Orthodox Union. I've got to laugh. Otherwise known as the OU. Just putting these two together in a chart is funny, especially in the New York Times. Greenberg begins. He writes, "A few months ago, I was seated at a sustainable seafood dinner in which neither the hip cooking school director to my left nor the locavore food activist on my right ate the meal. On the menu was Montauk-caught monkfish, once exploited, a creature whose stocks have been rebuilt as a result of markedly improved fisheries management. Still, my table mates eschewed the monkfish and ate a vegetable plate instead. Why? Both were observant Jews, and monkfish, it turns out, is not kosher." Greenberg goes on to explain what sustainable and kosher mean. He actually does not do a great job of explaining what sustainable means, but does a superb job of explaining kosher. That's funny in itself. He even goes into the complexity of what happens when a former kosher fish is genetically engineered, like a new type of salmon. But that salmon has a non-kosher protein, which is an anti-freezer promoter in it. He calls the protein treif, meaning not kosher. He asks the OU to respond, and the OU, which is the premier kosher certifying agency in the world, says that this new salmon will probably be certified despite the treif protein. Greenberg argues that the point of aquaculture is to add marine protein to the world, not to subtract from it. Greenberg concludes, if the basic and rational criteria can't be met, then it may be time to rethink the whole seafood endeavor and eat like my recent abstemious dining companions did. The vegetable plate can always be kosher. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. This cartoon is out of the Netherlands by Van Dam, published in Landsmeer paper. Now, the picture is of Africa, and the caption reads, Plagues of Africa, Ebola, hunger, AIDS, jihad. There was a huge Islamic saber across the head of Africa, and written on it is the word Islamist in capital letters. In other words, the problem behind almost all the plagues confronting Africa is the Islamists. The next cartoon is from the Indianapolis Star. It's drawn by Gary Varvel. Now, Varvel has been at the Indianapolis Star since 1994. His cartoons are syndicated through Creators Syndicate. He is extremely controversial, and this cartoon is no different. It appeared in the Indianapolis Star on October 30th, 2014. And I must say that when I saw this cartoon the first time, I hit the ceiling. I called it outright anti-Semitism. It is a terrible portrayal of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The scene is set with President Obama in the middle. Surrounding him are 3 Secret Servicemen. They're in black suits, white shirts, blue ties, IFB earpieces in their ears, and the spiraling cord coming out of their ears down their backs. The Secret Service man on the right is bending down and inspecting President Obama's shoe. As the president is cleaning it, he's scraping something off the bottom of his shoe. The agent reports into his microphone for all to hear, and here's the quote from the cartoon. The president just stepped in Netanyahu. Varvel compares Netanyahu to excrement. This is especially insulting after the leak and the comments made by a presidential insider calling the Israeli Prime Minister something similar to that. This cartoon was a result of that earlier story and takes the insult to an entirely new, very low level. In a moment, my own perspective and a few predictions. I've been thinking, since June, oil prices have fallen more than 45% to under $60 a barrel. OPEC has decided to keep output at the same level and not play with the supply or demand side of the price curve. Iran is very upset. The Iranians submitted their budget for next year, and they are reducing their expectations of oil profits. They're relying on less oil profits because of a drop in the price. As a result, less of their budget will be oil-based. Oil sale profits will be less substantial for Iran, and the Iranian leader, Hassan Rouhani, explained that the new budget, especially in issues of national infrastructure, will receive significantly less capital from oil profits. Rouhani told his cabinet that the cause was, quote, a conspiracy against the interests of the region, the Muslim people, and the Muslim world, unquote. He was referring to many groups, but his primary target was Saudi Arabia, which was the most significant force within OPEC, making certain that the oil output did not dip. Also, you've got to realize I've been thinking about Hamas, because other things are happening with Hamas. Hamas fired 3 rockets into the Mediterranean recently, and then last month, they fired 4 test rockets. In October, they shot rockets 2 times, once into the sea and once into the Egyptian desert in Sinai. They also conducted a few tests in September. Hamas shoots the rockets, and then they have spotters positioned in likely strategic spots, watching to see where each rocket lands. The Israeli security defense system is set up to sound alarms whenever a rocket is launched. So even if it doesn't land in Israel, the rockets are launched, and the sirens are sounded. Rockets Hamas is testing are the M302 rockets. They are mostly homemade, based on the Syrian and Chinese design. That was originally given to Hezbollah, and then they gave them to Hamas. They have significant range and can hit as far as Haifa. The head of Hezbollah named these rockets Kai Bar. Khaybar is a desert oasis about 70 miles from Medina in Arabia. It features predominantly in the Islamic tradition. Khaybar was a town mostly inhabited by Jews. The Jews living there were rejecting the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, and so they were slaughtered in what is called in the Quran the Battle of Khaybar. The choice of weapon should be no surprise, but neither is the choice of the name. Hamas is not just rebuilding, they are testing and improving their systems. I also want to tell you that Hamas had a rally recently. They were celebrating their 27th anniversary. For the rally, Hamas brought out their rockets, their elite teams. They even paraded their naval commandos for all the public to see. At the end of the rally, a blurry figure was shown, and Hamas asserted that it was Mohammed Deif, who Israel claimed to have killed in August. Deif was the head of the military wing of Hamas. He was paraded out, and an old speech of his was played. Thousands of people, including children, marched, and thousands more came out to watch. For Hamas, it was a huge propaganda show. Abu Obaid, spokesman for Hamas, their military wing, said, Hamas was able to stop the ambitions of the Zionist enterprise, and because of that, it is today on the verge of collapsing and disappearing. Hamas thinks Israel is dying. Hamas leader Khalid al-Hayya shouted, after 27 years, Hamas holds aircraft and holds the sea. It has the ability to penetrate the enemy by sea, land, and air. Anyone who thinks that Israel is here to stay is wrong. All of Palestine is Islamic land, and no one will share it. Jerusalem is the capital of Palestine and the center of the conflict, unquote. Propaganda is war also, and Hamas is involved in it. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquant piece of information. We spoke about the word treif today. In general, people think that treif means not kosher. That's correct, but it really means much more. Kosher means proper. Treif is a Yiddish use of the Hebrew. It comes from the Hebrew word litrof, which means to rip a limb out of the body, rip a limb out of socket, to dislodge it. The word treif actually comes from the Bible in Exodus 22, saying not to eat a torn limb of an animal. It's absolutely prohibited to rip a piece of an animal. Commentators say that this was commonplace in many ancient societies. It's a terribly cruel act against animals, and this tradition is one of the 7 commandments, along with the prohibition against murder, which non-Jews are also obligated to fulfill. The mitzvah or commandment is called Ever Min HaChai, which literally means to take a limb from a live animal. And it falls into the category of the ethical principles, which include being kind to animals. In civilized society, we do not rip animals' limbs off and eat them. It is indeed treif for Jews and non-Jews. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV on JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the JBS website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.